What happens when a prince walks onto a late-night stage thinking the world owes him applause, only to discover that respect has to be earned? In just 36 seconds of unfiltered arrogance, one royal guest managed to destroy any goodwill he walked in with, turning what should have been a friendly chat into the most uncomfortable television moment of the year. Stephen Colbert sat behind his desk that evening with his usual warm smile, ready to welcome his guest with open arms. The audience buzzed with excitement as Prince Harry strode out onto the stage, waving to the crowd like he owned the place. Stephen stood up, extended his hand for a handshake, and gestured toward the guest chair. "Welcome, welcome. Thanks so much for being here," Stephen said, his voice full of genuine enthusiasm. Harry gave a slight nod, barely making eye contact as he sat down. He adjusted his jacket and looked around the studio with an expression that seemed to say he had seen better. "So, great to have you here. I know you've been busy with a lot of projects lately. How are you doing?" Stephen asked, leaning forward with interest. "Busy is an understatement," Harry replied, his tone flat. "You have no idea what it's like to manage everything I have going on." Stephen chuckled, trying to keep things light. "Well, I think a lot of people watching can relate to feeling overwhelmed with work. It's part of life, right?" Harry's face tightened. "No, Stephen, it's not the same. At all. You sit here and tell jokes every night. I'm actually trying to make a difference in the world." The audience went quiet. You could feel the air shift in the room. Stephen's smile faltered for just a second before he recovered, keeping his composure like the professional he was. "I think a lot of people would argue that bringing joy and laughter to millions of people every night is also making a difference," Stephen said carefully, his voice still kind but firm. "Entertainment," Harry scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "That's not real work. That's not changing lives." Stephen took a breath, clearly trying to give his guest the benefit of the doubt. "Okay, let's talk about your work then. You've been involved in some important causes. Tell us about what you're passionate about." "Finally, a decent question," Harry muttered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "I'm working on mental health initiatives, which is something that actually matters. Unlike most of what happens on television." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Stephen maintained his calm demeanor, though anyone watching could see he was working hard to keep this interview on track. "Mental health is incredibly important," Stephen agreed. "I've talked about my own struggles with anxiety and grief on this show. It's something I think we all need to address more openly." Harry rolled his eyes. "Right, but you talk about it for ratings. I'm actually doing something about it." Stephen's jaw clenched slightly. He set down his note cards and looked directly at his guest. "I'm sorry, but I have to push back on that. When I talk about my mother's death, when I talk about my struggles, that's not for ratings. That's me trying to connect with people who are hurting. And that's me trying to let them know they're not alone." "Sure," Harry said with a smirk. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." The audience gasped. This was crossing a line, and everyone knew it. Stephen sat back in his chair, his expression now more serious than anyone had seen all night. "You know what? Let's try a different approach," Stephen said. "You came here tonight to promote your foundation and talk about your initiatives. So let's do that. What's the main message you want people to hear?" Harry sighed dramatically, as if the question was beneath him. "The message is that people need to wake up and realize that we're living in a world where real issues are being ignored, while everyone obsesses over celebrities and nonsense." "That's interesting," Stephen said, raising an eyebrow. "Because you're a celebrity who's on a celebrity talk show right now. So are you part of the problem you're describing?" Harry's face flushed red. "That's completely different. I was born into this. I didn't ask for any of it." "But you're here by choice," Stephen pointed out gently. "No one forced you to come on the show tonight." "I'm here because I have to be," Harry snapped. "Do you think I want to sit here and answer stupid questions? This is what I have to do to get my message out there, because the media won't cover the real work unless I play their game. Stephen nodded slowly, his patience clearly wearing thin. I understand that promoting your work can feel frustrating, but calling the questions stupid and dismissing what we do here, that's not playing the game. That's just being rude. Oh, here we go, Harry said, throwing his hands up. I can't say anything honest without someone getting offended. This is exactly what's wrong with everything. Everyone's too sensitive. Being honest and being disrespectful are two different things, Stephen replied, his voice steady. You can share your truth without insulting people who are just trying to do their jobs. Harry leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You know what your problem is, Stephen. You think you're some kind of voice for the people, but really, you're just another cog in the machine. You ask softball questions, you make safe jokes, and you never actually challenge anything that matters. The audience was dead silent now. Stephen's face remained calm, but there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I'm going to stop you right there, Stephen said firmly. I've had presidents on this show. I've had world leaders, activists, authors, scientists. I've asked tough questions about war, corruption, injustice, and inequality. Just because I also make jokes doesn't mean I'm not serious about the issues that matter. Please, Harry scoffed. You think you're brave because you make fun of politicians? That's not courage. That's easy. You know what takes real courage? Giving up everything and walking away from a toxic system. I have respect for anyone who makes hard choices to protect their well-being and their family, Stephen said, choosing his words carefully. But that doesn't give you the right to come here and belittle everyone else's path. Not everyone has the luxury of walking away from their job. Not everyone has the financial security to make those choices. Harry's eyes narrowed. Are you seriously trying to lecture me about privilege right now? That's rich coming from someone who gets paid millions to sit behind a desk and read jokes off a teleprompter. I worked for decades to get here, Stephen said, his voice rising slightly. I started doing improv in Chicago for no money. I worked on a basic cable show that most people never watched. I put in the time and the effort to build this career. And yes, I'm fortunate now. I'm grateful every single day. But I've never forgotten where I came from, and I've never talked down to people who are still climbing. Oh, spare me the rags to riches story, Harry said dismissively. You have no idea what real pressure is like. You've never had photographers following your every move since birth. You've never had the weight of an entire institution on your shoulders. Stephen leaned forward, his voice calm but intense. You're right. I haven't experienced that. And I'm not saying your struggles aren't real. But what I am saying is that everyone's struggles are real. The single mother working 2 jobs to feed her kids, she has real pressure. The veteran dealing with PTSD and trying to reintegrate into civilian life, he has real pressure. Your pain doesn't invalidate theirs, and theirs doesn't invalidate yours. We're all just trying to get through this life the best we can. That's such a simplistic way of looking at things, Harry said with a dismissive laugh. Maybe, Stephen replied, but it's true, and it's called empathy. Harry stood up suddenly, his face contorted with anger. You know what? I don't need to sit here and be talked down to by someone who makes a living out of mocking people. This whole thing is beneath me. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Stephen remained seated, looking up at his guest with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. No one's talking down to you, Stephen said quietly. I've been trying to have a conversation, but you've spent the last 15 minutes insulting me, insulting my staff, insulting this show, and insulting our audience. At some point, you have to ask yourself why you're really angry. I'm angry because people like you pretend to care, but you're all just part of the same broken system, Harry shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. You sit here in your comfortable chair, collecting your paycheck, and you think you're making a difference. But you're not. You're just noise. Stephen stood up now, facing his guest directly. His voice was still controlled, but there was an edge to it that cut through the tension. "Here's what I think," Stephen said. "I think you came here tonight looking for a fight. I think you wanted to be confronted so you could play the victim. I think you're so wrapped up in your own narrative that you can't see past your own experiences. And that's sad, because you do have a platform. You do have the ability to reach people, but instead of using it to lift people up, you're using it to tear them down." Harry's face went from red to almost purple. "How dare you? You have no right to analyze me. You don't know anything about me." "You're right again," Stephen said, nodding. "I don't know you personally, but I know what I've seen tonight. And what I've seen is someone who's deeply unhappy, taking that unhappiness out on everyone around him." "This is unbelievable," Harry said, shaking his head. "I came here in good faith, and you've turned this into an attack." Stephen let out a short, humorless laugh. "Good faith? You walked onto this stage with contempt. You've insulted me repeatedly. You've dismissed the work that hundreds of people do to make this show happen every night. You've talked down to our audience. And now you're trying to flip this around like you're the victim?" "I'm done with this," Harry announced, ripping off his microphone and throwing it onto the chair. "This is exactly why I don't do these kinds of shows. You're all the same. You twist everything." "I haven't twisted anything," Stephen said, his voice firm. "I've given you every opportunity to have a real conversation. You're the one who chose to make this difficult." Harry started walking toward the stage exit, then turned back around. "You know what your real problem is, Stephen? You're jealous. You're jealous because I actually matter. Because when I speak, the world listens. You're just a comedian who got lucky." The audience booed. Actual boos filled the studio. Stephen held up his hand, asking them to stop. "No, let him finish," Stephen said. "If he has more to say, let him say it." Harry looked shocked by the audience's reaction. He stood there for a moment, seemingly frozen, before pointing at Stephen. "You put them up to that. You turned them against me." "I didn't do anything," Stephen said, spreading his hands. "They're reacting to what they've witnessed. That's what happens when you treat people with disrespect. Eventually, they stop tolerating it." "This whole thing was a setup," Harry insisted, his voice getting louder. "You brought me here to embarrass me. This was planned from the start." Stephen shook his head slowly. "I brought you here to have a conversation. I brought you here to give you a platform to talk about things you care about. You're the one who turned it into this." "Liar," Harry spat. "You media people are all liars. You manipulate everything to fit your narrative." "What narrative?" Stephen asked, his frustration finally showing. "That you came on my show and acted rudely. That's not a narrative. That's just what happened. Everyone here saw it. Everyone watching at home is seeing it right now." Harry looked around wildly, or as if searching for support that wasn't there. "You're all against me. Every single one of you. This is exactly why I left in the first place. No one understands. No one gets it. Maybe if you tried talking to people instead of at them, they would understand," Stephen suggested. "Maybe if you showed even a fraction of the empathy you claim to care so much about, people would listen." "I don't need your advice," Harry shouted. "I don't need anything from you. You're nothing. This show is nothing. All of this is meaningless." Stephen took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. "If it's so meaningless, then why are you still here? Why haven't you left yet?" Harry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He looked lost for a moment, like he couldn't quite figure out what to say next. "Yeah, you want to know why?" Stephen continued, his voice softer now. "Because despite everything you've said tonight, you do care what people think. You care about your image. You care about being heard. And that's okay. That's human. But you can't demand respect while refusing to give it." "You think you're so wise," Harry said bitterly. "You think you have all the answers. But you don't know what it's like to be trapped, to feel like you can't breathe, to have everyone watching and judging every single thing you do. You're right. I don't know what that specific experience is like, Stephen acknowledged. But I do know what it's like to feel overwhelmed. I do know what it's like to grieve. I do know what it's like to struggle with finding meaning in life. Those are universal experiences. So when the way through them isn't by pushing everyone away, it's by connecting, by finding common ground. Harry laughed coldly. Common ground? With people like you? Please. People like me, Stephen repeated. What does that mean exactly? People who work hard? People who try to bring some light into the world? People who make mistakes but keep trying anyway? People who pretend, Harry said. People who put on a show and act like everything's fine when it's not. Stephen nodded thoughtfully. You know, you might be onto something there. Maybe we all pretend a little bit. Maybe we all put on a brave face when we're struggling inside. But there's a difference between putting on a brave face and being cruel to others. There's a difference between protecting yourself and attacking everyone around you. I'm not attacking anyone, Harry protested. I'm just being honest. Then let me be honest with you, Stephen said, his voice gentle now. I think you're hurting. I think you've been hurt by a lot of people and a lot of circumstances. And I think you're so afraid of being hurt again that you've decided to strike first, to push people away before they can reject you. But that's no way to live. That's no way to heal. Harry's expression flickered, something vulnerable crossing his face before the anger returned. You don't get to psychoanalyze me. You're not my therapist. You're right. I'm not, Stephen agreed. I'm just someone who's sat across from a lot of people over the years. Now, and I've learned that the ones who come in swinging the hardest are usually the ones who are hurting the most. Stop trying to make this about my feelings, Harry said, his voice cracking slightly. This is about you and your show and the media machine that destroys everything it touches. Then why did you come? Stephen asked simply. If the media is so toxic, if this show is so meaningless, why did you agree to be here? Harry had no answer. He stood there, his mouth opening and closing, searching for words that wouldn't come. I'll tell you why I think you came, Stephen said. I think you came because part of you still wants to be understood. Part of you still wants to connect. But you're so wrapped up in defending yourself that you've forgotten how to be vulnerable. You've forgotten how to let people in. You don't know anything about me, Harry said weakly, the fight starting to drain from his voice. Maybe not, Stephen said, but I know that what's happening right now, this isn't working. You're not happy, and making other people unhappy isn't going to change that. Harry stood there for a long moment, looking around the studio at the silent audience, at the crew members watching from the sides, at Stephen standing calmly behind his desk. His shoulders sagged slightly. I should go, Harry said quietly. You should, Stephen agreed. But before you do, I want you to know something. I genuinely hope you find peace. I hope you find a way to work through whatever you're dealing with. Because you're right about one thing. You do have a platform. You do have influence. And you could use it for good if you wanted to. But first, you have to stop being at war with everyone. Harry didn't respond. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the quiet studio. Just before he reached the curtain, he stopped and looked back at Stephen. For what it's worth, Harry said, his voice barely audible, I didn't come here to fight. I believe you, Stephen said. But somewhere between walking in and sitting down, you decided that's what you needed to do. And that's something only you can figure out. Harry nodded once, then disappeared behind the curtain. The studio remained silent for several seconds before Stephen turned to face the audience directly. Well, he said, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there at the start of the show. Or that was certainly not what we planned for tonight. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Stephen sat back down at his desk, organizing his note cards even though he clearly wasn't going to use them. You know, we do this show every night, he continued. We try to have interesting conversations. We try to make you laugh. We try to shine a light on things that matter. And most of the time, it goes pretty well. But sometimes you get reminded that everyone's fighting their own battles. Everyone's carrying their own pain. And sometimes that pain comes out in ways that hurt other people. The audience listened intently. You could see people nodding in agreement. I'm not going to pretend that didn't sting, Stephen admitted. Having someone come on your show and tell you that everything you do is meaningless, that's not fun. But I also recognize that hurt people, and I genuinely hope he finds whatever he's looking for. The audience applauded, the sound warm and supportive. Stephen smiled, a real smile this time. We're going to take a quick break, he said. When we come back, we'll try to end the show on a better note. Stick around. As the cameras cut away and the commercial break began, Stephen sat at his desk for a moment, processing what had just happened. The stage manager approached him, concern evident on her face. Are you okay? She asked. Stephen looked up and gave her a tired smile. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. That was intense, but I'm okay. You handled it really well, she said. You stayed calm and professional even when he was being awful. Thanks, Stephen replied. Though I have to admit, there were a few moments where I wanted to respond differently. But you didn't, she pointed out. That's what matters. Stephen nodded, taking a sip of water from the mug on his desk. Around him, the crew buzzed with conversation, everyone processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't every day that an interview went completely off the rails like that. One of the writers approached, tablet in hand. So, we should probably adjust the rest of the show. Maybe add something light to close out? Something to cleanse the palate? Good idea, Stephen agreed. Let's do that bit we've been saving about the mayor and the pizza rat. Keep it simple and fun. As the crew scrambled to reorganize the remainder of the show, Stephen sat quietly, reflecting on the exchange. He had interviewed difficult guests before, and he had dealt with people who were hostile or defensive, but this had been different. This had been someone who seemed determined to burn every bridge in the room. The floor director called out that they were coming back in 30 seconds. Stephen straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and prepared to shift gears entirely. This was the job. You rolled with whatever came your way, and you kept going. The cameras came back on. Stephen looked directly into the lens, his expression warm and welcoming again. Welcome back, he said. As promised, we're going to end tonight with something a little lighter. And just like that, the show continued. The band played, the audience laughed, the machine kept running. Because that's what it did. Every night, no matter what happened, the show went on. But for those who had been in the studio that evening, or watching at home, what they had witnessed would not be easily forgotten. It was a moment that stripped away the usual polish and revealed something raw and real. A reminder that beneath all the celebrity and spectacle, people were still just people. Complicated, flawed, struggling people trying to make sense of their place in the world. And sometimes those struggles spilled out in the most unexpected ways, in front of millions of people, during what was supposed to be a simple late-night talk show interview.